Welcome, everyone, to Vericen's celebration of Women's History Month. I'm honored to be today's moderator and to be surrounded by so many talented women leaders. There is nothing I like better than to talk and just hang out with amazing women, and we have that in spades for you today. Our panel will be sharing their stories and giving advice about topics like leadership, overcoming barriers, and how organizations can better support parents. Before we get started, let's hear from each of our panelists about their backgrounds and their current roles. Let's start with Carol Myers. Carol is a venture partner at Glasswing Ventures, funding early-stage entrepreneurs harnessing AI and frontier technologies, and a board member for several private and public companies. Carol, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Absolutely, Cathie. And to give people some context for where my comments today might come from, before I became a venture capitalist and a board member, I was a sales and marketing executive at several high-tech companies, and I was able to participate in joining them when they were really tiny and growing them up through IPO, and did that 4 times with 4 different companies. But before that, I started my career as an auditor and a financial professional who made this interesting career shift into sales and marketing. And then the one other thing that might be helpful for people to know, just in the context of our discussion, is that I'm a mom of 2 grown adults who are out in the work world themselves. And about 10 years or so, maybe a little bit more than that, into our marriage, my husband decided to stay home and be the primary caregiver for our children, which allowed me to concentrate on my career. So I always think it's fair for people to know that, because it probably gives me a different point of view than I think other people perhaps have had.
Absolutely, Carol. That's great information to know about you. So the next panelist is Stacy Bishop. Stacy invests in business applications driving the intelligent, connected world, and she also serves on several boards, including Vericen, the sponsor and host for today's program. Stacy, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
So I have been in venture capital for 20 plus years. So most of my career has been in venture capital. I actually joined as an associate, which is kind of the entry level point into venture, and worked my way up over the years and became a partner 10 plus years ago. So long career in venture. We're talking about, I've seen, 3 down cycles. So I've seen all of that happen. And there's lots of ups and downs in the venture market. And I can also add that I too am a parent of 2 kids, 2 teenagers though, so kind of still in the thick of it all. So can kind of help navigate that perspective through some of these questions, and still am navigating that with teenagers. It's a whole different thing than when they're little babies. So anyway, can talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, maybe after this is over, Stacy, we can talk about those teenage years. Mine are past that, but those were some tough years.
Yeah, exactly.
So our third panelist is Christine Barnhart. Christine is the Vice President of Product Strategy and Go-to-Market for Vericen. Christine, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Absolutely. And in all transparency, Cathie and I actually have worked together when she was the general counsel at a company that I was transforming supply chain for. So she and I have known each other for a long time, really similar to Carol and Stacy. I didn't start in strategy and go to market. I'm an electrical engineer by education, have done the, manufacturing, engineering, supply chain, and really moved into technology a few years ago. And now I'm in go-to-market and marketing. So Carol, we should compare some notes there. Similar to both of you ladies, I too have 2 kids. I guess for me, the perspective or the variation there is I got divorced when they were very young. And mine are kind of adults. I call them like they're almost adults. They're 21 and 23. Legally, they're an adult, but they're still on mom's payroll. So that's an interesting place to navigate as well.
Yeah, totally agree. I have one on the payroll and one not on the payroll. So I feel you, Christine. So thank you to all the panelists for joining us today. I know, listeners, that you are going to learn so much from each of these panelists. So panelists, let's kick off the questions by talking about leadership. You are all such awesome leaders in your industries and within your organizations. I have 2 questions about leadership. First, early in your career, did you envision yourself as a leader? And the second question is about your leadership style. Can you describe it? And is it different from your male counterparts? Christine, can I throw this one to you?
Sure. Absolutely not. When I graduated from engineering school, I was really focused in like just progressing as a subject matter expert in engineering. I never sat back and said, oh, I want to be the CMO, or I want to be the chief strategist, or, I'm going to lead people. I think I kind of came into it organically as I gained experience. And I love the question on, is my style different? Yes, I think generally it is. I don't know if it's always because I'm a woman or maybe because I'm a Libra. So if you think about like balancing, right? Like I can be very nurturing and caring. I think my staff would say that I definitely put, their kind of needs, first. But I also, I'm very driven by like, if you give me a commitment, then I'm going to hold you accountable to it. So I can be a little intractable on like delivering things that you commit to, which I think is like, for a lot of people, they're like, wait a minute, like, are you a nice person or are you like aggressive? Right. And I'm like, well, I'm a very nice, driven person that's going to hold you accountable, and I'm going to hold myself accountable too, which I think it's just not something I've encountered a lot from my male counterparts.
Nice and driven is a tough walk. It's a tightrope for women, right? So great description there. Stacy, do you have any perspective on this question?
I do. So I definitely envisioned myself taking on a leadership role. In fact, when I was young, I thought I was going to go more like the CFO route. So I don't think I ever envisioned myself ever being a partner at a venture firm and sitting on boards and that type of thing. But I think I kind of was like, okay, I'm going to be something. Like I was always driven to sort of, land in a certain place. And kind of when I look back at my childhood, I definitely took leadership roles then, although I'm somewhat shy. So that was something to overcome, is trying to be shy and sort of be more bold. Like doing these panels, I used to be, when I was younger, I would be an absolute wreck. I think age brought wisdom. And so I was able to, not get quite so nervous doing these things. And then from a leadership style, I definitely noticed a different thing. And this is going to be more the venture perspective, but I would, the way the venture industry works a lot of times is you might shadow a partner and you really work on, that apprenticeship and you learn from them. And I was working with a partner, a guy who, he had a very bold personality. He was always saying very funny things, but he was very direct and very, strong personality. And therefore I thought I needed to be like him. And over time, I realized I didn't need to be that way. It took me a little while. I didn't need to be the tough person in the room. And in fact, the role that I learned that I could play, particularly in the board setting, was I became more of the confidant for the CEO. I mean, you don't have to tell Paul this, but I became more like the one they trusted, the one they brought the bad news first, because I was the less scary version than that like ugly, mean board member over there. So I kind of got all the information, and therefore, because I view these venture investments like, once we make the investment, I'm on the team. I want this investment to be as successful as everyone else. But I think sometimes in board situations, they end up in this situation where they're on opposite sides of the table, where it's like, the board members trying to tell the CEO what to do. And that's not how it works. It's like, you just want to help the company do the right thing and be the best company they can possibly be. So whatever that takes to make that happen. And so I just realized that style was different, but it actually really worked. And it in fact became an advantage over time, because I was more of that trusted contact versus some of the other board members. Not always the case, but in a lot of the cases, that was the way it worked.
Yeah, I love that perspective, Stacy. And it also really brings home the importance of diversity. You want different kinds of personalities on a team to really have the best impact. So
Exactly.
answer. So ladies, there's some really interesting data from a study conducted by Zinger and Folkman. They are leadership gurus. And the study is about how women are really excellent leaders. They conducted a survey, and women received higher marks than men for things like drives for results, bold leadership, and takes initiative. I wasn't surprised by these results because of the rock solid female leaders that I've been surrounded by during my career. But I'd like your perspective. Are there benefits to having women in leadership? Carol, can I throw this one to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first benefit of having women in leadership is that women are 50% of our population. So if you don't have any women in your leadership, there's a very good chance you're not attracting the top talent that there is in the world, because you're only choosing from half the population, and thus you're losing out on a lot of capability, intelligence, and skills that's out there. So you have to question whether or not you're really attracting the very best people if you're only pulling from half the population. And by the way, if you find that you have an all majority male leadership team, you have to wonder even more, because now you're pulling from even less than half the population. So my experience, and one caution for women, is that we do have some really great skills and strengths, and I think those come through in that research that you were talking about. But you mentioned driving for results, and I think that is something I generally have seen women to be good at, but it's really important for women to be cautious that they don't get pigeonholed, because what I often see is that women who are outstanding at marshaling resources and executing get dismissed as not strategic. So they make it to a certain level in leadership, but they don't necessarily get elevated to the top echelons because they're so valued for their execution that those around them start to pay more attention to how well they execute and aren't as attuned to listening to when that woman is really adding a lot of value strategically. So I think that women need to make sure they play to their strengths, but make sure that on the flip side, their strengths don't end up pigeonholing them and preventing them from moving to the very top positions that they should be in. And it's a shame when companies don't take advantage of the talent that's out there.
You know, Carol, that is really a fascinating response, because in this same data, women didn't score as well on strategic thinking. And I couldn't really understand why, but your explanation really helps me see why that is, why that could happen. Christine, do you have a perspective on this question?
I think, my perspective would be kind of similar to Carol's in terms of that driving results. I know that early in my career, I was so focused on, I was like heads down driving results, but I wasn't really communicating to the organization what my thought process was, how I got there. And honestly, I thought that my results would speak for themselves, and therefore organically, I would be promoted to the organization. And ultimately that's not true, right? Like, you have to market yourself, and you have to make sure that others in the org understand the benefit that you're bringing. It can't just be like check boxes on a paper.
Yeah, great, really great point. That's going to be really valuable to our listeners. So now let's talk about barriers. Do you think that women face unique barriers at work? And if so, what do you think are the most significant barriers to female leadership? Stacy, can I pitch this one to you?
Sure. I mean, I think you have that dynamic sometimes in situations where, say, it's all men on the management team. People will look to people who are like them. That's just common human nature. And therefore, you have to kind of break that barrier just simply because there aren't the examples there. But, as time passes, you see more and more women in leadership roles. I see more and more women running companies. Hopefully that will change. I look at the new generation of, my kids growing up, the equalness that's happening today with kids and sports and everything that didn't even happen in my generation. All of that will take time. So I think it's just bringing, the more we can do to help people along, mentor them, whatever we can do to put them in those situations where they can be seen for those opportunities. But it's changing that mindset of people who, aren't used to seeing women in leadership roles. So the more we can do to raise that awareness, put women on pedestals, even within an organization, make sure that they're getting credit. I mean, one of the things that I love being a board member is I do get to help drive those decisions. I'm on comp committees. I can help drive comp decisions. I can point out when I see, wait, all these people are 75th percentile in their comp, but this person isn't. Or why isn't this person getting a promotion? And you can ask those questions and hopefully have some impact in making a change in someone's life. And I love those CEOs who are well aware of it and really are working to promote people within their organization to the top. And you see that it's almost as if it's a mission, like they're trying to find those people and nurture them along and put them in those leadership opportunities, which is wonderful.
Yeah, totally agree. Finding the most talented person is a really a great skill for people to have, regardless of gender. So Carol, do you have a perspective on this question as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think all the things that Stacy said are spot on. I think the underlying biggest challenge for women, people of color, is that there's an unconscious barrier. There's an unconscious set of expectations about what leadership looks like what a good leadership style is. There's a lot of stereotypes. These are really hard to see. And most of the people who harbor them, which by the way, women harbor them against women as well, they don't intend anything, and they don't really often know that their thinking is being affected by these unconscious bias. And so it's really important for us to remember that in ourselves and in others. As women, we can't just outright change it. So regardless, we have to keep pushing forward, and we can't let unconscious bias be an excuse, but we have to root it out in ourselves and also be looking for it in others. And then the second big thing that I think holds women back a lot is ourselves, and the fact that we sometimes don't really put ourselves out there, ask for what we want, and understand our true worth and value and expect to get it. And I think that sometimes that holds us back from taking opportunities or pursuing paths that we should be pursuing and that we're perfectly capable of doing.
Carol, I'm so glad that you mentioned unconscious bias. So listeners, if you want to learn more about unconscious bias, Harvard has an implicit bias test. It's free, it's online. It will take you 20 minutes to assess your own unconscious bias. And I was at a conference recently, and the speaker said, if you have a brain, you have unconscious bias. So you will have it. And as Carol mentioned, women, we have unconscious bias against women. So take the test and understand your own bias so you can manage it. So let's move on to the next question. McKinsey has some really interesting data about how women earn more college degrees than men, but men receive more promotions. And the cumulative impact is that there are more CEOs named John than all the women CEOs combined in the Fortune 500. That's amazing. Why aren't there more female leaders? That's the question. Christine, can I throw this one to you?
Yes, I'm so excited to answer this question. So it was interesting. I was kind of prepping for our discussion today and ran across a quote by Rachel Thomas from leanin.org, where she said, and it just spoke to me, where men are typically hired based on their potential and what they believe they can do, and women are typically hired and promoted based on what they've already accomplished. And I have dealt with this numerous times in my career, where somebody would be like, "Oh, but you've never done that before." Well, yeah, but look at all this other stuff that I've done that has value, where I've, really shown that you can put me in a new situation and I'm going to figure it out and I'm going to do well. And, and so I think that really is one of the things that it is an unconscious bias. I think Carol straight up, totally. And I think it's one of those things that we have to keep top of mind as leaders. So as we're hiring, as we're promoting, we're not holding people accountable for different things.
Yeah, let's assess people the same way, regardless of gender. Yeah, makes really good sense. Stacy, do you have a perspective on this question?
Yeah, I wanted to add to what Christine says. That's a great point about, having to be, have all the criteria, but I think women also do that to themselves. They've seen that same data where women won't apply for the job unless they can check all the boxes, whereas men don't. And, I've spent a lot of time, so I'm raising a son and a daughter, and I spend a lot of time looking at the two of them and wonder, where does this come from? Like, why do women not go for it in the same kind of way, or think highly of it? And so I think, like, how can I, instill this in my children? I don't know, but I do think it goes back to just not having, not seeing as many people. We women ourselves need to believe in ourselves and believe that we can go for it and that we are qualified for these opportunities. And then we'll talk more about it later, but the household burden, you guys have heard, we can get into this more, but the mental burden that women carry raising families, I do think it makes things hard, and there's a perception. So, for example, of late, the whole kind of rise in paternity leave, I think, is really good. It helps with sort of leveling the playing field, making men more involved in their children's lives very early on, but also not putting like, oh, this woman's going to be out for 2 months. It's kind of like people are going to be out when a child is born, and that's going to become common. So it's not held only against the woman as like the fear of being out for maternity leave and having children. So, because there's even been studies to say, a woman has a child and she starts to make less money. A man has a child and he starts to make more money. I don't have the quote of the exact study of that, but it's like well known. The men's status goes up, the women's status goes down in the workplace. And we just need to change those perceptions. And I think having the paternity leave is one way to sort of help change that.
Yeah, Stacy, good perspective. I totally agree on the importance of not only offering paternity leave, but also really encouraging people to take it, having a culture where it's expected you're going to take that paternity leave. So great answers there. Let's go on to the next question. The International Women's Day theme for this year is Break the Bias. I'm a big believer that women alone, we cannot make the change. We four ladies, we can talk, but if it's just us, we can't make impact. We need male allies to lean in and support the change so that we see more women advance. Do you have advice for our male allies who are listening about how they can better support women? Carol.
Yeah, I would go back to the unconscious bias because there are many men out there who mean to do well. They have a daughter who they believe in completely, and they would never want anyone to not promote their daughter. So they view themselves as supporter of women, and they probably are. But they really need to evaluate what's driving their decision making. So you'll see many men who, believe that they are big promoters of women, yet you might look at their executive staff and not see that many women on it. And you'll hear things like, wow, we just didn't get that many women in on this hiring slate, or gosh, the women we did get, they just didn't have, that thing we were looking for. And so I think it's important for men to recognize their own unconscious bias. It's natural to want to work with someone who's more similar to you. And so when you don't choose that woman for promotion, when you don't choose that woman to mentor, when you don't hire that one or two women who was on your slate of candidates, maybe they really weren't the right fit, but maybe you should dig a little bit deeper and try to be able to clearly articulate what they didn't have. Because if you can't get specific about it, it's very possible that what's driving your decision, as well-intentioned as you are, is that little unconscious bias, that little orientation towards being with someone who's more like you and played the same sport as you or whatever it might be. And so I think that's the big thing that men and women probably need to try to address.
Yeah, great perspective there, Carol. Christine, do you have some advice about how we can break the bias?
Yeah, I think for me, it's kind of like one key thing, which is I think our male allies need to give credit for transferable skills, and they need to hire and promote for potential, not just accomplishments. So for me, I have some great male allies and mentors, but to Carol's point, I have still taken a step back and gone, now, wait a minute, you're judging this person very differently than you're judging this person. And, I'm a huge proponent of really hire for attitude and whatnot, and then train for the individual skills.
Can I just add one more to this?
Absolutely.
I wanted to add, so one of the things, and this is more specific to the venture community, but it does play out, I think, across many industries, is give, as a mentor and an ally and, perhaps a manager, give that female airtime. So one of the things in venture, and I'll use an example of, is when you're a new partner and you're trying to lead an investment, and say you've just gotten that board seat. Well, in some cases, the more senior partner may join that partner at that first board meeting. And I'm a big advocate of no, don't. And in fact, when I was kind of rising up through the organization, I was mentored by one of my male partners. And when I knew I was going to start leading investments, I said to him, I can't have you in the first meeting, because if you're in the first meeting and you're the more senior person, the CEO is going to lock onto you and listen to you. And that person, that my male counterpart, had a more dominant personality than I did. So I didn't have a chance to shine. And it was interesting. I met another venture person, and I was giving him advice to a person he was mentoring within his organization. Said, whatever you do, you cannot go to that first board meeting. You have to give her airtime. You have to allow her to let her voice be heard. So my advice to male counterparts is just remember that in every meeting and in every situation, give them air, give them space to talk, let them finish their thought. Don't let them be interrupted. Let their voice be heard, because if their voice isn't heard, they're never going to be heard and they're never going to get ahead.
And the organization is never going to have the benefit of those diverse voices, so that they're more innovative and can make the best decision possible. So Stacy, great perspective there. I love that.
On a funny note, Stacy, I will tell you, in my personal life, I no longer allow my husband to car shop with me, because we would walk on a lot and they only want to talk to him. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm an engineer. I understand what I want to buy. And why do you keep talking to him? So it's I got this. I'll call you when I find what I want.
There is story after story that you could tell. I'm sure we all have the stories of where everyone thinks we're the assistant telling them what to do and where to go. And you just very politely correct them and say, no, I am this. But yes, it happens time and time again.
Yeah, love that. So we're going to stay with the same topic, but talk a little bit differently about it. So what do we do? What's the advice for our listeners if they're listening in and they're like, okay, I hear all of this. I hear how, about unconscious bias and how we need to break the bias and all that. But what happens if the CEO or a senior leader within my organization has this bias and they're not tuning in and they're not taking the Harvard implicit bias test and they don't want to change? What is our advice for women within those organizations who are trying to get ahead? Carol, any perspective on that?
I say leave. It's a great big job market. It's amazing. It's wonderful. It's like the best time in the world. And I do mean that seriously, if they're in your way, right? You might be able to get, you may not report to the CEO, so maybe you can fulfill your career ambitions because there's other people around you where you are. But when you're finding that you don't want to go in the morning and you're feeling bad about it, sure, it's great to try and help them out. But I say, go find some place where you can thrive, because you deserve it. You deserve to thrive. I do think if you feel up to it, when you take that next amazing job, and by the way, you apply for something that's bigger than what you're doing today, because you're not afraid to go for it, even if you don't check all the boxes. If you can get yourself comfortable enough, I think it's worth sharing feedback with the people strategy team or whomever you feel comfortable when you leave about why you left, and maybe giving them some constructive feedback that maybe for the next crew, they'll do a better job. But sad to say, but I would say just go find a better job.
Carol, I tend to think you're right, especially in today's job market. So I think the answers for our listeners are, number one, try to make change if you can. And number two, if you can't, walk away. Okay, let's pivot now. And now we're going to talk about COVID. We are now in year 3 of COVID. I can't believe it. And if we've learned anything, it is that COVID had a disproportionate impact on women. With that as a backdrop, I have 2 questions. First, what can women do to balance career, personal life, and passions? Is there such a thing as balance? And second, what can organizations do to better support women and parents overall? Stacy.
Well, I'll start with what can organizations do to better parent. I mean, this is one thing that I think is amazing about some of the larger companies that can afford this, but I think any sort of childcare on site at companies can help dramatically, because I think that is a hard, the way the childcare market works today, especially, I mean, once you get your kid in kindergarten, it's much better. But up to that point, it's hard. Maybe the preschool is okay, but finding daycare options. And that's what, I mean, I felt lucky that my children were older when COVID hit. They were very independent. They could do school, but those parents who maybe had a caretaker at home with them that they couldn't anymore because of COVID, or their daycare center closed, they took the real brunt of it. And it was really hard on husbands and wives, but I think, really probably disproportionately hit the mom. And so anything around childcare. The other thing, I think COVID, the one thing we can take from this is the flexibility. It used to always sort of boggle my mind, school would end at 3, but most people had to work at 6. So what did parents do in those 3 hours after school? I mean, there were aftercare programs and whatnot, but it's a struggle for parents to cover those hours. With allowing more flexibility so that a person can work while their child's in school, but then pick them up at school. And then if they have to pick up work later, whatever it is, or maybe there are more options around, working 80% instead of, the 100% work week. So flexibility, I think flexibility is key for making it work better going forward.
Yeah, really good perspective. Christine, do you have some thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything Stacy said. I think flexibility is really key. Similar to you, I sat back during the pandemic and counted myself very lucky that I wasn't in a position where I was trying to work and homeschool my kids and things of that nature. But I think, the pandemic, if we think about positives that have come out of the pandemic, I think it's accelerated the acceptance of hybrid and flexible work. And while there's challenges in that, I think overall it's really positive. I mean, even for myself, I started this role 6 months ago. It wasn't open to me pre-pandemic because we had you must be at headquarters policy. And now we have a remote first policy, right? Which allows me then to take advantage of that and work for companies that I love versus working for a company that might be in my backyard. I think the other part of that, and Stacy hit on it, is for me, it's about results as a leader. This is what I need from you. I am not measuring how many hours you're in front of your computer or how many hours you're in your seat, right? This is what I need from you. And if you're delivering that, then you're meeting your objectives, whether you're working 35 hours this week or, 60 hours. This is, the commitment that we've made to each other.
Yeah. And whether you do it at 6 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the middle of the night,
exactly.
Just get it done. So yeah, great perspective there. Let's now talk about the imposter syndrome. These are my questions. Have you ever felt it? Have you ever felt the imposter syndrome? And if so, how did you navigate your way through it? And what advice do you have for our listeners who may be feeling the weight of the imposter syndrome? Carol, any thoughts on this one?
Yes, this is so big and important. And it's something I talk to almost every single person I mentor. I have often felt the sting myself. And in fact, when I think about my biggest regrets, they're not the things I did, they're the things I didn't do. It's the CEO roles I didn't pursue. It's the lack of confidence I had to raise my hand or take on that risky assignment. And it's when I let the imposter syndrome hold me back that I regret the most. So I always try to push people to say, don't let this hold you back, because those are the things you're going to regret. You're not going to regret that you went for it and you failed. You really aren't. So I think the best things to do are to acknowledge it, to name it, to accept it, to know that it's natural, to know that everyone experiences it, men and women, probably even Elon Musk, I don't know. And it doesn't mean that you are an imposter. It just means that you're human. So I think, when it happens to you, when you feel it taking over your ability to act, you need to take a pause. You need to remind yourself of all the things you've achieved. Maybe it sounds cheesy, but go back and enumerate them. Take an inventory of your strengths, think about your skills. Think about all the things you've learned, things where you stepped in and didn't know how to do something and you got it done. And then figure out how you can apply those to what it is you're facing right now, because you can do it. I think going through those things will really help you. And then lastly, just continually remind yourself, it's okay to ask for help along the way. Like if you don't know what you're doing, it's okay. You're going to learn and you can ask for help, because you don't have to be perfect. No one is perfect at all, and shouldn't be the expectation you put on yourself. So that's generally how I try to think about imposter syndrome.
Really good practical advice, Carol. Stacy, do you have some thoughts? Do you ever feel imposter syndrome? And if so, how do you navigate it?
Yes. I mean, I think we all feel it at times when we're put in situations where we don't feel like we're the expert or we know as much as everyone else in the room. I will even often have it, you're meeting with these amazing entrepreneurs. They know so much more. How am I going to be the one to judge their business and whether it's successful? But I loved all the points Carol made. And I want to add to that is I think one of the challenges, and I know I personally have this, is the concept of this replay tape in my head. So when I make a mistake, I will sort of play it over and over and over again in my head and just kind of have regrets of, what mistakes I made. And what you need to do is let it go and move on, like learn what you can from it, but then just put it to bed, whether you write it down and let it go. You've got to move on, because otherwise it'll weigh you down and it will continue on the imposter syndrome. If you did go for it and you failed, you might be fearful to go for it again, but you have to kind of take what errors happen, learn from that and move on and try again. And so not giving up and just keep trying, because yes, everybody fails. But, this is probably my own bias, I'm going to say, but I think sometimes men can let it go more easily. And in fact, I don't know the study, but this is getting into kind of detail where there's a certain part of your brain that is where the replay tape, and in some men's brains, it's literally not as much brain activity. Some men don't have the replay tape in the same way women do. So it's a fascinating thing, but it allows them to let go and move on, whereas we have to kind of force it. So it's fascinating on that front, but just move on.
Yeah, that is fascinating. I hadn't heard about that, the difference between men and women there. Okay, so we now have some questions from the audience. And so the first question from an audience member relates to mentorships and sponsorships. They'd like to know, did you have a mentor or sponsor help you advance to where you are today? Carol, can I hand this to you?
Yeah, absolutely. And the answer to that is, again, yes. I look back and every day, I have to tell you, I'm incredibly grateful for both the mentors and the sponsors that I've had. I would definitely not have been able to achieve a lot of the things or get some of the roles that I got without those people. And I think it's really critical to have both. I think where people get a little tripped up is they think about it as a formal relationship where you ask someone, will you be my mentor? I think that most of them don't happen that way. For me, it's really been much more organic. You can tell someone's taking an interest in the work that you're doing. And so you really want to foster those relationships. The other thing to remember is mentors and sponsors are very different. You want many mentors. Of course, having many sponsors is great too, but mentors are people you can go to for advice, be a sounding board. So you need some who might be able to help you with leadership. You need some who might be able to help you with your discipline, in my case, marketing. They might be more senior than you. They might be peers of yours. They don't necessarily have to be more senior. Sponsors are really critical. to your ability to move forward, because sponsors aren't just lending an ear or advice, they're actively helping to promote you, whether that's internally at your own organization or someone who's constantly recommending you to other organizations. And often a sponsor is going to give your name to people for that job you probably are afraid to go for because you don't think you have everything you need, but your sponsor sees it in you. And so I think that those are really important relationships to have. And if you can find a sponsor in your company or outside your company, huge benefits. And the most important way to do that is to make sure you foster your relationships. Don't let them languish. I think women, because of the competing needs and their time for family and friends and work, don't network as much as they should. And so say yes to that cup of coffee, say yes to going to have lunch, say yes for a quick drink after dinner if you can squeeze it in, but try to make sure you're fostering those relationships. And don't just take, look for ways that you can give back. Spot little ways that you can do something nice for your mentor or your sponsor, make them look good at work, make a connection for them, whatever it might be. I think those things go a long way to helping you in your career every day.
Great advice, Carol. Christine, what about you? Have you had a mentor or a sponsor?
Yeah, I mean, I've had both. And generally my advice to people is, is build out your tribe, which is what I call my people, right? Some of them are much more tangential relationships. Some of them are very personal. I will tell you, they're the people that hold a mirror up to me periodically and say, yo, wait a minute. And then, along that same note with Carol, especially early in my career, some of the people that I worked with, they saw more in me than I saw myself. And they would tap me on the shoulder and they're like, hey, we're going to move you into this role. And at first I was like, oh, well, am I not doing the other role well? And they're like, no, we think this is a growth opportunity for you. And they really pushed me in that direction, which I am so thankful for. I mean, I've had numerous career changes and opportunities to work with different companies. And often that was predicated by a person that was in my tribe, regardless of what you want to call them, saying, hey, this is a great opportunity. I think that you have the skill set to do well here. And so, for me, that whole networking thing, Carol, I actually have to work at it. So I will, go through my LinkedIn. I'll be, oh, you know what? I haven't talked to this person in a while. I like them a lot, but I've just gotten busy. And then I reach out to them. Hey, do you want to catch up? Can we have virtual cocktails or whatever it may be? Because it's not, who it's who's willing really to provide, guidance and expertise and recommendations. I think that's how you advance.
Great thoughts there, Christine. So we have another listener question, and this one relates to women helping women. So we talked about how can male allies support women. Now this question is, how can women support women? Stacy.
Well, I think the simplest one is help women. One, you can also be that mentor. So that's one thing, but the other one is just simple things like, even in meetings, the interrupt driven culture, don't be the interrupter. Also sort of help that woman's voice be heard, make sure that again, going back, the voice being heard, what I said before, give the airtime. Women can do that as well. Making sure, we've all been in that situations where you make a point and it kind of sort of falls like a thud on the table. And then somebody just right after you makes the same point, but maybe says it slightly different. And people, oh, that's a great idea. And it's that frustrating. So make sure that doesn't happen to that woman in the room. And I've seen it where just the dynamics of the interrupt driven culture, we interrupt people, and I've had to call people out who interrupt me, and you want to do it in, not an obnoxious way, but point it out. So just help that voice be heard.
Yeah, I think it's so much easier if another woman calls out the interruption as opposed to the woman who was interrupted calling it out. So
yes,
great piece of advice there, Stacy. Christine, do you have any thoughts on how women can support women in the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's numerous ways. I think for me, the way I try to impact is to really nurture and shepherd the women, both that work for me and the ones that I'm, connected with. And, a pet peeve of me right now is women that say, I'm sorry, right? They start everything, like every time they're going to provide some critique, I'm sorry, but, right? Or I'm sorry to ask you this. And I'm like, no, you're not sorry, right? And I read something, I think it was like the nibble theory, that talked about how in order to, like, women try to make themselves small so as not to upset other people. So they take kind of bites out of themselves. And part of the way that we do that is by starting things with I'm sorry or apologizing. So that's my trigger right now. The women that work for me know that I'm like, if you start with I'm sorry, we're not even going further into the conversation. Stop, back up, start over. But I mean, I think part of it is just being present and being engaged and being willing to invest, both in challenging your own bias, but then in supporting the people that are around you and how you make it better.
Yeah, great advice there. And you heard it here, listeners. Be careful with the I am sorry. Sometimes it's appropriate, but count how many times you're doing it in a day.
Exactly.
So panelists, thank you so much for joining us. I'm confident that our listeners are going to want to hear more from all of you. I'd love to go around the table and have each of you talk about how we can connect. Can we connect with you on social media? Do you have upcoming speaking engagements, or are there other ways that we can follow and hear more about what you're up to? Stacy, can you kick us off with that?
Sure. So I'm on both LinkedIn. That's one way to connect with me. And also, so Stacy Bishop, and then also on Twitter, which is at Stacy Curry. And then also you can just reach me via email, stacy@scalevp.com. So get a lot of inbound email, and hopefully I can help that way. But those are a couple of ways to follow me.
Great. Thank you, Stacy. Christine, what about you?
Yeah, similar to Stacy, LinkedIn is always a great place to find me, Christine Barnhart. Or you can email me, christine.barnhart@verison.com. Or if you're in like manufacturing and supply chain, you can find me at Modex in Atlanta at the end of the month, or in California the week of April the 11th, speaking at the Society of Plastics Engineers DEI sessions.
Great. Thanks, Christine. Carol, how can we connect with you?
Same here. I'm on LinkedIn. I actually don't use much of the other social media, and it's linkedin.com, whatever, Carol J. Myers, and you should be able to find me there. And then my email is carol@glasswing.vc. And do I have anything coming up? I think I'm speaking at a marketing profs thing coming up in April, but I don't remember the exact date, unfortunately.
Thank you so much, Carol. And for me, I'm Cathie Nestrick. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm also the co-host of the Parody Podcast, and you can find Parody Podcast on Apple, Spotify, and other places where you find your favorite podcasts. So, listeners, thank you so much for celebrating Women's History Month with us today. I hope that you learned as much as I did from this insightful and inspirational panel. Thank you, ladies, all so much. And listeners, we hope to connect again with you soon.